Hello, hello. Welcome in. We have a little iced lavender decaf latte today. I'm trying to go a few days without having caffeine, so we're kicking it with the decaf today, although I do miss matcha. We have a very cozy setup going on today. We got the Christmas tree lit in the background. I'm filming this at literally 4:30, but it's freaking dark outside, so we're fully committing to a nighttime setup. So I really wanted to create a video essentially reflecting on my first NaNoWriMo, the things that I learned about my own drafting process, things I've realized that I want to take into future nanos or that I just want to keep in mind going through the rest of the rough drafting process. And I'm really excited to get into this. If you're new around here or you just need a little refresher, hi, my name is Brielle. I'm 24 years old. I'm a sort of newbie author, but I did write in the past. I was a writer in middle school and high school, but took a really long break away from it and just recently got back into it with this NaNoWriMo and this current project that I'm working on. I'm currently drafting a adult romantic fantasy. I started working on it a few months ago, and during NaNoWriMo I added 20k words to my rough draft, bringing my total rough draft right now to 35k words. This was my first time attempting a NaNoWriMo ever, and I did document the whole process. So if you missed all of those videos, there's a playlist. You can just go see them on my channel. It was quite an endeavor, and I documented the entire thing, and I ended up with 20k words. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the things that I learned. If you're also a beginner writer, maybe some of these things could be helpful to you to hear, or maybe it'll just validate something you've already experienced. Maybe you'll totally disagree with the things that I learned, but I think the biggest key here is writing is so individual, and these are things that I've personally learned about my own process, but that doesn't mean that it's universal. That's the fun thing about it, is everyone has their own little methods and the things that work for them, and this is just kind of what I learned works for me. So I did sort of go into Nano with the intention of maybe trying to hit 50k words, but at the same time I did manage my own expectations, because this is kind of the first project that I'm seriously drafting with the intention to bring it to completion. When I was working on like my book projects back in high school, it was very much like I would pick up an idea, I would go to town with it for a little bit, and then I would get bored and I would get distracted by a different idea, switch over. Basically, I was starting a lot of projects, but I did not finish a full-length novel like ever. The only project I ever finished was like a 10k word little spy story, probably when I was in like 8th grade or something. So not a full-length book by any means. Literally, I could get that many words in like 2 days now if I really wanted to. So this is my first like full proper drafting process, and needless to say, I didn't know a ton about my own process or how long it would take me to draft, how long it would take me to write. I had no sense of my own writing pace, how many words I could expect from myself in a day, like none of that. I knew none of that, obviously, because I hadn't done it before. The Nano process was really a chance for me to like learn about my own writing habits more than anything else, and I think that's honestly the biggest thing I took from it. One of the things that I think I really learned about my own writing process during Nano is just that I work better with longer chunks of writing, and that doesn't necessarily mean sitting down at my desk for 10 hours, but like I think I thrived more on the days where I wrote a couple thousand words throughout several sessions during the day, instead of just trying to like squeeze in 200 words after work type of thing. I totally understand that for some people, like those more bite-sized chunks might be more accessible, less intimidating, or maybe that's all you feel like you have time for in your schedule. But for me personally, I found that writing on the weekends and letting myself really get immersed into the story and really start thinking about it really helped me to get those higher word counts, because something I experienced, and I talked about this in my Nano Diaries number 3, is taking some time to get into the book at the beginning of the day. You know, my first writing session was usually not very productive. I would usually only get a couple hundred words, and it wasn't until I had returned to the project and maybe had been working on it for a couple hours that day that I really started getting into flow and things started flowing easier. So I think I just learned that personally I work better when I kind of focus on writing throughout the day, or I have a bit of a longer writing session and give myself enough time to get back into the world, because especially with fantasy, it's like you need to suddenly re-immerse yourself in this other world, other society, and you need to get into your character's voice and your character's head. And I just think I learned that immersion and flow state was really essential to my writing progress, and that's not something that I could achieve by just doing a random 10-minute sprint on a random day. For me, it needs to be like an intentional practice, and it needs to be me being like, okay, today I'm writing like for several hours and I'm gonna get a couple thousand words. That's what I found helped me really start to get higher word counts going later into Nano, because that's where my creativity really thrives and I can get into flow. Another thing that was essential to helping me succeed at Nano, and we'll talk a little bit more about how I define succeeding at Nano, because technically I failed at Nano. I didn't hit the 50K words, so I didn't win Nano, but do I feel like I won Nano? Kind of. And we'll talk about that later. Something else that I really learned helped my writing process was writing dates. You guys saw this in my Nano vlogs. I think there's something so powerful to taking yourself out of your regular environment and having a dedicated session to focus on a singular project. I loved taking myself on little excursions throughout this Nano. You know, it doesn't have to be something where you're spending money. The park was honestly just as good of a writing date as the coffee shops were. But just taking myself out to specifically write, one, it helps you feel like you're taking it more seriously, which helps you feel more like legitimate in pouring time into this thing, helps you romanticize the process. There's just a lot of benefits to that, I think, to giving yourself this feeling that, okay, this is something I'm actually doing and that it's serious, like I'm taking my writing seriously. I think that could be really impactful for helping you to actually prioritize it. I also just feel like being around other people when doing my writing sessions was really inspiring. I could like soak up some of that energy, and I just think, especially if you're someone who works from home, or maybe there's something else that you tend to do at your desk where it kind of feels like a space that maybe you spend too much time at, writing in a different location can be really freeing and can make it feel a little bit more like leisure and less like work. And that's something that I was really grateful I was able to maintain throughout this month, was the feeling of writing being pleasure and not work. And I honestly think saving it for the weekends helped with that as well, because I wasn't going to writing from a really drained state at the end of the day where I don't feel like I have the capacity for it. I was going to writing like at the beginning of a Saturday and pairing it with going for coffee and a croissant, and it was just much more pleasant that way, and it felt like a little treat for myself on the weekends, something I was looking forward to and that I was genuinely craving by the time I got to the weekends, because I was taking those breaks. I think consistency looks different for everyone, and I totally understand how there could be benefits to writing every day, but I also think that a system like what I have going of writing every weekend can be equally good. You're still getting in that regular writing, you're still maintaining some semblance of consistency, but on the days that you're taking off from writing, you're allowing that desire and that like little itch to build to the point where you're excited when you get back to the page on the weekends, and you're not going to burn yourself out necessarily. This next one, I know it's controversial. I know some of you are not going to agree, but like I said, this is ultimately just my experience and what's been working for me. If you make a wrong turn, it's okay to backtrack. We all hear the general advice about drafting, how you're not supposed to edit as you go. It's supposed to be super rough. It's supposed to be a mess on the page, whatever. And while I agree, of course, I also think that not all words are helpful words. What do I mean by this? Let's say you're writing a scene and you start writing that your main two characters are going to take the bridge to get to Narnia. This is a very random example, okay? You're writing that the characters are taking the bridge to get to Narnia, and then you have this thought, or you see something in your notes and you're like, no, they need to take a train. They're taking the train to Narnia, the bridge is out, there's no freaking way I'm using that. I hate it. I personally think that even if it's a first draft, it is worth going back and correcting that major plot element that you know you want to change. Let's say you need to go back like a page or a couple hundred words, maybe rework something. I personally think that's worth it. I'm not saying you should go back to chapter 1 if you realize there's something you want to change. Maybe you should save that for revision. But if it's like, oh, I just took a wrong turn and I see that it's a wrong turn, don't keep going in the wrong direction, because those words are not going to be usable. To me, not all words are created equal. I care more about getting words that I think are usable, or that I think are at least loosely going in the right direction, as opposed to just writing words for words' sake. I know that might be a controversial one, but that's just how I feel. I did this several times throughout my drafting process where I went the wrong direction and I had to backpedal. Maybe I lost a couple hundred words there, but it was worth it for me to gain clarity about the right direction. Not to mention the fact that you don't want to be creating a snowball of errors that's going to cause you such a pain in the butt in revision if you don't have to. If you can correct it in the moment and maybe you have to go back a few paragraphs, I think it's worth doing that. At the end of the day, revision is going to be hard regardless, but anything you can do to make it slightly easier on yourself during the drafting drafting process, I think is a good thing as long as it doesn't totally kill your momentum. It's kind of like this is where your book is going to end up, like a flat line here, and this is where I feel like drafting should be. So if you end up going like this, I think it's okay to course correct, even if you lose a little bit of progress, even if you don't get quite as many words, course correct a little bit, because I think a first draft should be a little more like this and not, you know, if you can avoid it. I mean, sometimes things happen, but you know. I want to talk really briefly about how I defined success for myself with this Nano and what I think the purpose of Nano really was for me and what it can be for other people, because like I said, I didn't hit the 50,000 words, but I'm so glad that I did Nano, and in my mind, I still kind of felt like I won because I made really great progress in my manuscript. I wrote stuff that I liked. I wrote ideas that I was happy with. I came up with new elements to the plot and the characters. I made writing consistently, or my definition of consistently, like weekly, a habit. I loved the process. I had fun every time I wrote. You know how NaNoWriMo has the little mood tracker where you can select like, how did you feel writing today? And there's like a smiley face or a frowny face. I was always on the smiley face side, which I loved. And honestly, I think if I had really pushed myself to try to hit 50,000 words this month, that would not have been the case. I think I would have had more writing days that felt like work. I probably would have diluted the quality of what I was writing quite a bit and maybe ended up with a lot of words that were just kind of fluff to get the word count down, which again is not my goal personally with a challenge like this. My goal is not to get as many words as possible no matter what. My goal is to get words that are going to help me finish the book, right? And honestly, I heard this sentiment reflected back from some of you who mentioned times where you did hit 50,000 words, but it was a miserable process getting there. In my opinion, everyone should adapt Nano to what serves them and what makes sense for them, what will help them on their own writing journey. And I'm really glad that I was able to do that this month. And I also think I now have a way more realistic idea of my writing pace. Like I can get a couple thousand words in a day, but I can really only do that on the weekends. And I can hit 5K words in a day. I did that once, but that requires a pretty special day with quite a lot of time and motivation and me being in flow state pretty much the entire time. So now I feel like I have a way more realistic idea of my pace of drafting, which I think will help me to plan out how long it's realistically going to take for me to finish this rough draft. Something else that was kind of interesting about this process was I sort of unintentionally became a diehard pantser. And what do I mean by this? Essentially, I kind of planned to do quite a bit more planning before I went into Nano, but just kind of ran out of time and decided to just plunge in and go for it. And I really feel like I really loved and resonated with discovery writing. That doesn't mean that I went in with absolutely no ideas. I had general sort of big plot moments in mind, but a lot of the in-between was fuzzy, and honestly, a lot of it still is fuzzy, but I was so pleasantly surprised by the things that I did discover while writing. I think planning is great, and I think honestly, I would plan more for future projects. I'm definitely gonna do a very serious planning, outlining, brainstorming session when I complete this rough draft before going into draft 2. That's when I think I'm gonna do a lot of that more intense, detailed plotting and outlining. I just think that's when it will fall in the process. But for me, in terms of actually coming up with the ideas, I feel like that has happened very naturally through the drafting process. Realizations, thoughts in the shower, things that just kind of fall onto the page that I wasn't planning, all of that has been part of my experience, and I wouldn't trade that. I came up with things that I never would have been able to just from thinking about the idea and not getting any words down. It's kind of like that saying of like, you find the answers by doing, not by thinking. And I honestly think that this applies for a lot of things in life, where it's like, you can try to plan as much as you can try to strategize before going into it, but in actuality, a lot of the answers are going to come from you actually like getting in there and doing the work and being submerged in it. I feel the same way about starting a YouTube channel. You know, so many people get stuck in the planning phase, but when you just jump in and start creating videos, you learn a lot through doing. So that's kind of how I felt about the writing process, was like, I was finding the answers through the drafting process, and now I'm going to be able to really pull everything together when I revise. So I definitely feel like I've discovered I'm a bit of a pantser. With that being said, I also do intend to plot more in the future. I just think it's important to leave enough room in your process for discovery writing. Even if you are a diehard plotter, I think it's important to still allow yourself to surprise yourself. Does that make sense? Like, you can go in with a strict plan, but if something else happens and you love it, I think it's in your best interest to go with it. I feel like being a bit of a pantser and discovery writing has allowed for me and inspiration to have a little bit more of like a cool relationship. And I even described in some of my writing vlogs how it felt sometimes like the ideas were not coming from me. They were coming from somewhere out here and just entering my little fingers and going onto the page. And that was a very cool experience that I think was partially because I allowed myself to take this more discovery writing approach. So my banana bread is done. I'll be right back. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up so that I can go eat some banana bread. Final thoughts about Nano. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I do think I would set a more realistic word count goal for myself, at least at this stage with how my current drafting speed is. I'm sure as I become more of an experienced writer, I would be able to draft quicker, or even if I didn't have a full-time job, I could see myself being able to do a full Nano. But I think for now and for like the camp Nanos and probably next year's Nano, I foresee just aiming for 25K. I think that's a realistic amount for me personally to strive for in a month. But on the months where I'm not doing any sort of writing challenge, I feel like I could realistically probably aim for like 15,000 words in a month or something like that. The accountability that I got from filming my writing every week really helps me to make significant progress in this rough draft in a way that I never would have if I didn't attempt NaNoWriMo. So even though technically I did not win it, I still feel like a little bit of a winner because I'm so happy and proud of the progress that I made during this month. And I know that without Nano, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Not to mention, I really did love the community aspect and just being able to hear about everyone else's projects, seeing so many other authors drafting or working on their books in my comment sections throughout this month was just like so sweet and fun. And I'm hoping that that sense of community carries on for me past November. At the end of the day, word count is sort of an arbitrary metric. It's nice to have such a concrete way to sort of track and acknowledge your own progress. So I understand why we track word count and why it's a thing. But at the end of the day, it is very arbitrary. And I don't think it's worth getting hung up on the 50K goal or on any word count goal when what really does matter is writing consistently, writing things that you're happy with, getting a project started or off the ground, making meaningful progress in your project. All of that is way more important than word count. So I'm glad that I was able to keep that kind of level head on my shoulders this month and not drive myself crazy trying to hit the 50K. So what are my writing plans going forward? So I'm obviously going to continue on this rough draft. I'm going to create an entire video towards the end of the month discussing my writing plans for 2024 and setting writing goals. We're going to start a new vlog series that's essentially just going to be the rough draft vlogs. So me documenting the rough draft of Project the Wall. Basically going to be the same vibe as the Nano Diaries series, but we're just going to be calling them the rough draft vlogs. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you have not seen my Nano series, definitely check it out. This is technically the final episode of that series. So there are 6 total Nano related videos, including this one. If you do like my content and you want to support me, I have a Ko-fi page where you can buy me a virtual coffee. So I will have that linked down below if you are interested. I really do appreciate it. Let me know down in the comments, how did your Nano go? What word count did you end up getting to? And if you have any advice or realizations that you also realized during doing this Nano, definitely leave those in the comments. I would love to hear you guys' tips. I hope you guys have a very happy holidays and I'll see you back here soon with another one. Bye!